Shiva comes to the rescue and he swallows it all up. And this is why Shiva's neck turns blue. This is why he's Neelkant. The only thing that helps him soothe down the pain of hala hala is Bhaang.
So what is Anandamide?
Anandamide is basically a neurotransmitter in our bodies. It's already there in our bodies. We don't need to take ganja to feel it.
Ganja क्या होता है? Bhaang क्या होती है?
All of these things come from the one plant called cannabis. Ganja and charas, anything that gets you high, that is all the fruiting tops of the plant. If you're just taking the fruiting top in itself, that would be the ganja. If you rub it down, break it down, pisa ke, if you make the black resin that comes out, that is charas. Golgappa wala pani is just filled with far more dangerous things than the bhang would be filled with. You feel scared ki everyone knows around you that you're not in control anymore. Yeah. That is the worst part of it. This paranoia ki sabko pata hai main kaun hu. So you are focusing a lot on everything you see, everything you hear, everything you smell. You become very, very present tense.
Other passages, other historical references for ganja or cannabis?
So I think the famous one is the Sushrata Samhita. If you don't want to celebrate it, at least be aware of it. That we gave this to the world, or at least the cultural importance of it.
Such a great backstory about Khushwant Singh and Perversion Mist. Anyway, Karan, welcome to the show. Very excited for you to be here and talk about cannabis, charas, ganja, MDMA, coke, smack, right?
Thank you for having me. You said all the drugs under the rainbow. I'll stick with the cannabis, ganja, charas, bhang.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, I'm very excited to do this, mostly because, jaise we were talking off camera, I don't think cannabis in India has been given a journalistic academic treatment, right? We've seen this in research papers. We've certainly seen the NDPS Act. हम लोग न्यूज़ में सुनते रहते हैं NDPS Act के अंदर इतने ड्रग्स बरामद हुए, ये है वो है. And unlike the West, we don't have a pro-cannabis culture. If it is, it's in a 1% small group who advocates for its legalization because of medical uses and how it makes them feel recreationally, but mostly borrowed from the West. We don't have an active movement that has yet pervaded the mainstream. Yeah. You decide to write a book on cannabis and you call it Ananda.
Yes.
Like a history of cannabis, right? Probably like a good start to this is to think about terms. So what is Anandamide?
So great question. I think this is obviously the best place to start. Ki title ko Anand kyun bulaya maine? Anand, Ananda, jaise bhi aap bologe. Ananda is the word, if you know Sanskrit or any language that is inspired by Sanskrit, Anand means bliss, it means joy. And Anandamide is basically a neurotransmitter in our bodies, in our brains. It's already there in our bodies. We don't need to take ganja to feel it. It's a function in our bodies that helps us feel a certain emotion, certain blissful emotions.
Like, is it close to endorphins?
It's not exactly the same as endorphins, but it is similar in its description. It's similar. I mean, for example, the way I've described it in my book is, I'm a runner. I like to run long distances, and that feeling you get, the runner's high, that is your Anandamide acting up. The feeling you have after an orgasm, that is the Ananda happening, and it's natural. Your body's producing it. You're not taking this out of any outside external substances. Now, cannabis in its compound has this. The major compound in cannabis is called THC, and THC is the stuff that famously gets people high.
Yeah, tetrahydrocannabinol.
Yes.
Cannabinoid. Yeah.
Yes, I'm glad you said it, so I didn't have to say it.
Mess up. Yeah.
So the THC का जो chemical structure है, it is almost the same as the chemical structure of anandamide, which is already in our bodies.
Yeah. Isn't that why we say we have endocannabinoid receptors in our body already?
Yes. Yeah. So these are already in our body. The receptors are there to receive.
Yeah.
And what THC does is it mimics. वो नाटक करके it's like plays a duplicate double role, and when there's not enough anandamide in us, or when we don't need anandamide, it gives us a false sense of anandamide.
Right.
And so it basically gives us that feeling of the runner's high or the orgasmic high, or any, if anyone who has been high on ganja or any form of marijuana will say, it's basically fabricating this high, which our body is already ready for.
Right.
So this is where the word Ananda comes from, because for me it was just such a beautiful term that at the end of the day the feeling of that high is just bliss and a joy. It's not this khatarnak, dangerous thing that often it's built upon to be. it's a blissful feeling at its very core. अब इसके आगे वाले जो है वो we'll get into that, but at its very core it is an Ananda which I wanted to seek.
Yeah, and it's a very long, very interesting book. I could get through about 300 pages. Then the time for this podcast came, so I haven't got to the last of it. I would love for the people who are watching this to read this. Let me start by being honest. I've been smoking cannabis since I was basically a teen, right? अब वो सारी research studies ये कहती हैं कि 25 से पहले आपने फूका तो आपका brain develop नहीं होता. वो सब तो हो गया. That ship is long since. We're here, right? But my story is also the story of a lot of not only tier 1 city kids, tier 2 city kids who discovered this drug very illegally, right? And they score it through peddlers and through friends, and they smoke it. And a wide variety of experiences happen. Many call it's a mild psychedelic at the right doses. Many call it life changing. और उनकी वो identity के अंदर एक wedge आ जाता है where like pre-stoner बनना और अब stoner बनना, right? And there's all this literature, movies around this. If you think about the 80s and 90s, you've got Dam Maro Dam and stuff like that. Of course, you have Shiva, which is the patron saint of stoners. Wrongfully or rightfully, we will discuss that. But everyone on some capacity has either heard about cannabis, ganja, ya charas, ya bhang, or has tried it. In some places it's not taboo. In some places it's very taboo. Taking from that lens, जब आप इसकी research कर रहे थे, you went to Malana, you went to other places, Varanasi, you went to Kerala, right? For the cannabis taboo, what does this cannabis taboo manifest as?
So, if I'm getting your question right, what did the taboo manifest as in my journey?
In your journey in India, all around, during the research for this book?
So you absolutely hit the nail on the head when you said that in some places it is, in some places not. So it's very funny. Like in the north of India, I'm North Indian. My family's from Varanasi. I've grown up in Uttarakhand a lot. So for me, in these places, it is taboo, but it's also very normal because it grows everywhere. It grows naturally.
It's a weed, literally.
It's literally a weed. And weed ka matlab hua ki like you don't have to try to grow it. Har jagah, matlab there's a chapter earlier. I mean, if you've read that far, where I'm in Uttarakhand, in this small village in the Bugyals of Uttarakhand, where I was told ki yahan par jahan bhi bakre ki tatti hoti hai, wherever there's some goat shit, you will find some cannabis next to it. And the goats were shitting everywhere, and there was also cannabis everywhere. Not that those two are related. The point was ki it's just as normal to the...
As far as the eye goes, you have...
As far as the eye goes, you know. And in parts of Himachal and Uttarakhand especially, and also in some parts of Rajasthan, etc., like it has been part of the indigenous culture of Indians to use Bhaang-related... Bhaang is the same plant as cannabis. To use Bhaang-related things to either make rope, to make their shoelaces, to tie their animals, to sometimes have dawai. If somebody's got a bee sting, they'll put some bhang paste on it. So all of these things have existed for hundreds of years in Indian culture, and it wasn't really considered a taboo in any way because it was part of the natural ecosystem.
Right.
Now, when I went to the south of India, where it's a little bit more rare, it's not as indigenous, even though there are parts of Kerala, parts of Andhra, parts of Karnataka where it grows in huge amounts. It wasn't as much a part of the village livestock culture, so to say, to use cannabis in non. And by the way, all these uses that I've talked so far are not the uses to get high on. They're uses for practical things. So, and it was very funny because in the south of India, I was told by some people that if you wanted to, if you had some beef with your neighbor, if you had some ladai with your neighbor, you throw some cannabis in their house as a way to like curse them ki abhi pakda jayega.
Kya?
Like that was something some people would just say,
Right.
Like it is that much of a taboo in the south.
Yeah.
So it really depends on, which is, I mean, it was very interesting to me, in the same country, the same plant that grows everywhere.
Yeah.
I put a stat earlier on by like a former narcotics director in India that he estimated that 60% of districts in India have natural cannabis growth.
Yeah.
60%, that's like...
we used to get so excited when we first started smoking cannabis as late teens, which I don't recommend, of course. That's my official statement. लेकिन देख वहाँ गांजे का पौधा है, देख वहाँ गांजे का पौधा है, यहाँ गांजे का पौधा है, फोटो बना रहे हैं, देख कितनी सारे गांजे के पौधे हैं.
हर जगह है almost, जहाँ our climate really supports it. So it's like you hit the nail on the head. This is what I kind of found in my travels too. कि कुछ जगह people don't mind talking about it. Like हाँ है तो है, and openly they will say कि whether it's for now if it's tied to any spiritual reason तब तो कोई भी डर नहीं है. Then everyone खुल के बोलेंगे कि हाँ 2 दम और लगा लो, move on.
Yeah, you're from the city of Varanasi.
Yes.
तो आपने तो अपने बचपन में grow up करते हुए you must have seen the chillum smoking sadhus.
Yes.
उनको तो कभी कोई there is never any police intervention for the sadhu to stop smoking it, right? What was growing up around this chillum culture in Varanasi? Did you feel mystified by it? Did you ever want to go and try it with these guys?
The funny thing is, there is no mystery to it. There's no mysticalness to it. There's nothing about it. To me, a holy man sitting by the ghat in Banaras, smoking a chillum. The chillum in his hand is as much a part of him as like the mala he's wearing or the mandir he's going to. It's just a normal part of being, a holy person in these parts. So to me, but at the same time, my family, because we are not a very religious family, or we're not the kind of family that like, I think my parents were always the word, they didn't know what it was. उनको पता है कि कुछ नशा है.
Yeah.
Nasha can mean so many things, funnily enough, alcohol is a little bit outside of the purview of the nasha for a lot of Indian families.
Sure.
This is not, this is nasha bura hai, to nasha bhara brown sugar ho, cocaine ho, ganja ho, all nashas are in the same umbrella. So for me growing up, har nashe se dur rehna hai was the advice. The big exception is holy, bhang. तब तो मतलब सब लोग खुल के भांग पीते हैं, and it's like the whole city is like completely, high on bhang.
Yeah.
Completely out. In my Banaras chapter, I've written about, I was there on Holi last time, and मतलब सुबह 6:30 बजे टेक्नो म्यूजिक शुरू हो जाएगा, पार्टी शुरू हो गई, and by 10:30, 11 सब लोग भांग पी के आराम से डांस करके अब सोने का टाइम आ गया. And this is the best any bhang drinker has known, that there's no better way to nap on earth than after getting really high on bhang.
Because you're literally stoned. It's like you're carrying a stone, like a stony high inside you. ये जो भांग वाली चीज़ है ना, it's very interesting. होली के टाइम पे क्या होता है? And I always wonder about the quality of the bhang, because I think with the illegal market, at least what they do is, I mean, America में तो legal market है खैर. They really regulate the weed very well, right? Like they make sure कि regulated अच्छा. आप जाते हो किसी खोखे पे और आपको भांग की गोली मिलती है 2 रुपए की. There is no possibility in the world that a 2 rupee bhang will have the same effect as like a cannabis sativa strain that you buy for $30 in America. Or nowadays what they do is, I don't know if you've been around like people who do this. They're like आपको OG मिल जाएगा. मैंने कहा OG क्या होता है? वो OG अमेरिका वाला जैसे होता है ऐसे वाला. It's like, so they try to sell those strains here, but it's still regulated. With this bhang, I've seen lots of people be very reckless because we don't have a culture exactly of handling these things, even in religious settings. Yeah.
It's true. See, my perspective or my experience of bhang and the fact it's unregulated is usually almost the same as almost anything else I'm eating off the street.
Okay.
Banaras mein, one of the things Banaras is known for is the street eating culture, street food culture. तो अब मैं जाके गोलगप्पा खाऊं और गोलगप्पा वाला पानी is just filled with far more dangerous things than the bhang would be filled with.
Sure.
I've had friends who've come from abroad जो एक गोलगप्पा खा के 2 हफ्ते फिर वो उल्टी करना नहीं रुके.
Yeah, they get typhoid and food poisoning.
So there's a lot of things that are unregulated in India, and I feel bhang is just one of them.
Right. Yep. For definitions, because I think बहुत सारे लोगों के जो parents होते हैं, it's first of all these things are shrouded in secrecy.
Yes.
Right. And they have, even despite the fact कि आप religious festivals पे भांग consume कर सकते हो, North India में खासकर, there is a lot of fear mongering done around marijuana in the country. It is also strange that it happens to be a part of the NDPS Act, and I don't know what the stats are, but if you look at it, a lot of like arrests in cities for non-dealer levels will be probably done with stupid kids who are just getting high somewhere, right? Because it falls in the NDPS Act. For definition's sake, and this is very simplistic for me because I know it, but for everyone else, charas क्या होता है, गांजा क्या होता है, भांग क्या होती है?
Great question. All of these things come from the one plant called cannabis. Right. Cannabis एक plant है जिसके बारे में हम अभी तक बात कर रहे थे. Now the ganja and charas, and now the English words you use, marijuana, weed, anything that gets you high, which you smoke in that way, that is all the fruiting tops of the plant. Fruiting top मतलब बिल्कुल जो पत्ते में, the actual fruit that is growing and it's, it has the best smell, and that is the one that becomes, if you're just taking the fruiting top in itself, that would be the ganja. If you rub it down, break it down, pisa ke, if you make that little brown, the black resin that comes out, that is charas.
For clarity's sake, by the way, charas looks very similar to afim. If you've seen the charas ki wo jo tola hota hai, it looks very oddly similar to opium, black opium. Yeah,
that is true. But no one is going to mistakenly give you afim because it's so much more expensive.
Yeah, okay.
So,
I don't know.
And I feel that's like, I mean, unless you go to the wrong dealer who's trying to get you hooked onto it, no problem hoti hai. So those are the two. The fruiting tops make the ganja and the charas, and these are illegal in India. They're illegal across the board for recreational use in India. Now the leaves of the same plant, जो उसको पीस कर बनता है, that is the bhang, and the leaves of the plant are legal in India. And they're legal not naturally. It's up to every state's purview. The states can decide, and the districts can decide. So which is why we see, again, I'll go back to the example of Varanasi, but you've seen this in cities like Pushkar, you've seen this in cities like Jaisalmer. A lot of spiritual cities in India will have government-approved bhang shops.
Yeah, and many cafes also sell bhang lassis.
Yes, yeah. And these are generally legal, because these are the leaves. Now, the one thing you didn't ask me about, the another definition is the hemp. Hemp is another word thrown around a lot around the same plant.
For sustainable fashion startups in the country.
Yes. And hemp is now the stalk and the branches and the other parts of the same plant. This is why it's such an interesting, beyond the very basic idea of like, ganja fukne wale, they like to get high. The cannabis plant is so interesting because it is very limitless in a way. It is, there's so many different dimensions to it. And hemp is something that I guess, we can get into that later. But so that's another part of the same plant.
So it's roughly all of these three things. And what I found very fascinating in your book is you mentioned that लीव्स स्टेट बाय स्टेट लेजिस्लेशन के अंदर आती हैं कि आप लीव्स अपने हिसाब से देख सकते हो कि भाई मैं उड़ीसा हूँ, मुझे क्या करना है, मैं महाराष्ट्र हूँ, मुझे क्या करना है. बट द बड जो फीमेल पार्ट होता है वो दैट इज इलीगल अक्रॉस द कंट्री.
यस, इट्स इलीगल एक्सेप्ट फॉर very small amount of medicinal research, which has only started in India about 5 to 10 years ago. Some states have allowed, and some specific government institutes actually have allowed research for the medicinal use of the marijuana bud.
In a clinical setting,
in a clinical setting.
And where do they source this marijuana from? They grow it themselves?
Another very good and interesting question, because its answer is very complicated. In India, the rule is that if you want to grow any cannabis, sorry, not the India rule, the rule in the states that have legalized it. Uttarakhand is a good example. In Uttarakhand, the rule is that if you can grow the plant, the hemp plant, for industrial use, if the THC percentage, we talked about THC already, is 0.3% or lesser.
Okay.
Which is, uska matlab hai ki there's no chance you will get high on this.
Got it.
This is clearly only for industrial use.
But how do you make sure कि इस plant के अंदर THC percentage कम है? Like
they have, for example, in Uttarakhand, in Dehradun, which is the capital, they will have these like, they'll have these places where farmers send the seeds into, or they send samples. But you cannot control it, because at the end of the day, these are not lab-grown plants. These are growing out in the field. So it's almost like the farmers I introduced for this that I interviewed for this project. This was one of their big complaints कि शुरू में 0.3 कम था, लेकिन उसके बाद ज़्यादा हो गया, because after all it is natural. Like things will, season after season, depending on the rain, depending on the conditions, the THC can spike or come down. We're not working in a lab-controlled environment.
Yeah, because in artificially you can really change the lights.
Yes.
Change the ventilation. Yeah. It's completely controlled. Yeah.
Now to get back to what you're asking about the medicinal part, the medicinal part over 0.3% is allowed. But the medicinal part is it's the same way that we have opioid medications. Like opium is, heroin also can come from opium, but your dawai after getting a root canal can also come from opium.
Correct.
And it's very highly controlled. And I think that is the space that cannabis medicine has got into a lot of other countries, and where India is thinking about getting into like everything is happening at slightly a slow pace as it usually does. But this is where the medicinal side of cannabis will be useful.
अभी आपने अपनी किताब में लिखा था कि September 2024 में there was a state legislation, I'm not sure if it was Himachal Pradesh or Uttarakhand or Himachal Pradesh, where they have now tabled a bill perhaps or thinking about it to make cannabis legal for medical purposes en masse.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
When you say en masse, do you mean that like...
नहीं क्या, what is, I don't know.
So they're basically trying to emulate as much as they can. Not 100% because I also haven't read the actual documentation. But they are trying to emulate the Uttarakhand model, which is that they want to do controlled legalization of industrial use, and industrial use for under 0.3% THC and medicinal use for over 0.3% THC. 0.3% is a very magic number when it comes to the world of cannabis. India has borrowed it from the American Agricultural Board, which is another kind of bullshit thing because the ganja that grows in America is very different from the ganja that grows in India.
It's way stronger.
You know? And but even beyond the strength, the compound is going to be different because it's a completely different setting. You know, वहाँ पे तो you can actually do lab grown stuff. यहाँ पे it's just growing. There's nobody's really trying to control कहाँ क्या हो रहा है. And as I said, it grows everywhere. So it's hard to kind of control that, you know.
Yeah. Your book starts very interestingly. आप बोलते हो कि you're a teenager and आपको कोई पंजाब में भांग खिला देता है, भांग पीते हो खिला देता है,
पीता हूँ मैं,
पीते हो, फिर आप उसमें आप बोलते हो कि like you're basically, if you could, for my listeners and watchers, describe the feeling of getting high, because there's a huge majority who has not experienced it. You know, even like in a quasi legal manner, which we do in India, right? What is the feeling of being high? And I will of course share my experiences and see if we can come to some sort of a consensus around what feeling high looks like.
And this was a completely legal thing. Before anyone gets too excited, what I did at age 18, have bhang by the train station from in Patiala by a government-approved bhang seller. You know, we were both following the rule of the law. You know, I had actually turned 18 earlier that year. I had finished school. I had my first cigarette after the day I finished school as a celebration.
Wow, you were so excited to finish school.
And then when I got high, I'm like, I'm cigarette kyun piyunga? This is like a way better feeling.
Of course.
So the first time I had bhang was, this is how my book really begins. It was, I was 18 years old. I'd gone to visit a friend of mine in Patiala. और वहाँ से I was taking a train from Patiala to Delhi. I was going from one friend to another friend. और as a goodbye to this friend, हम लोग ने, you know, he was my closest friend. हम जाते जाते हम लोग दोनों ने स्टेशन से वो एक भांग लस्सी पी ली. And then I got onto my train. The train must have left Patiala station at around 3 p.m. It's a 4 or 5 hour journey. And कुछ नहीं हुआ. Absolutely nothing happened. I bought myself an Archie's comic. उस समय वो ज़माना चलता था. You know, Jughead Jones Double Digest. बैठ के आराम से पढ़ रहा हूँ, पानी पी रहा हूँ, bourbon biscuits. You know, obviously all time favorite खा रहा हूँ मैं. कुछ नहीं. I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, who cares ना? About half an hour passes, and I feel like I have left planet Earth. I feel like I'm in a different parallel universe. You know, I mean, maybe in a Christopher Nolan movie. कहीं और पहुँच गया मैं. Everything sort of. Now I know what happened. Us samay, it's a very scary thing, and I feel this is something I'm echoing the experience of almost anyone who has bhang. And I mean, I was 18, but I feel even if a 40-year-old has bhang for the first time, might feel very scared at the very first time, because it's a very unfamiliar experience. You feel that you're not in control of yourself anymore. And you feel scared that everyone knows around you that you're not in control anymore. That is the worst part of it. This paranoia कि सबको पता है मैं कौन हूँ. You know, people can see through me. You know? People can know my flaws. वो मेरे चेहरे से पता चल रहा है कि मैं कमीना हूँ और उनको पता है मैं कमीना हूँ. So now I know better कि what actually happens is that your senses are heightened. So you are focusing a lot on everything you see, everything you hear, everything you smell. You become very present, very, very present tense. Like maybe before the journey, I was thinking about कि हाँ यार after दिल्ली में अपने दोस्त के साथ ये 5-6 चीजें करूँगा. Now I can't even think 2 minutes in the future. I'm very, and this is why a lot of people love this feeling, because you feel alive in the here and now. You know, and that is a scary feeling. Because we are almost as human beings, we're conditioned to think ahead. We're not conditioned to live in the present moment. So, if I listen to music, every sound feels very magical and big, Every smell feels magical and big. So I think that is my best description of getting high. It just this feeling of being immensely present. And actually, bahar wale logon ko kuch nahi, you are actually who you are. Unko kuch nahi pata in most cases ki you're high or whether you're not high. It's all in your head.
When I first started listening to rock and roll, ऐसा होता नहीं है कि आप क्लासिक रॉक सुनो और ग्रेजुअली आप 60s के साइकेडेलिक रॉक पे पहुंच जाओ. साइकेडेलिक रॉक के आसपास आप रॉक कॉन्सर्ट फुटेज के अंदर लोगों को एक अलग तरह की सिगरेट पीते हुए देखते हो जो रोलिंग पेपर से बनी होती है, which is in propaganda terms of the 60s, they call it a marijuana cigarette. Show how bad it is. But we just call it a joint. Right? It's like a joint. Right now it's like a spliff, a joint, cigarillo, बहुत तरीके आ गए हैं. The world is expanded. It's a fucking retail business. But my first time, and this is, I sort of knew, मेरे स्कूल में एक लड़का था, वो फूकता था, वो मेरे से 6 साल बड़ा था. Dude, I was barely 16.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Like I'll tell you, like when I started and people knew I started smoking weed, I was condemned across the city कि ये गंदा लड़का है, ये गंजेड़ी है. Look, in my defense, I had, just as I had started to play in a rock band and trying to make music on the side, I found it a helpful part of the counterculture to also smoke weed. And also, आपकी इतनी 2D existence होती है that how do you rebel? Like people drink, drive, crash, die. As you know, like जो early teens होते हैं illegally दारू पीते हैं, right? Or they'll do some reckless shit. So for me, it was like I had read so much cannabis-related literature already that I was prepared. I'd read so many forums like vbhigh.org, going on all these forums to see what is the experience of getting high. Then I started saying how to find weed near me. Google पे search कर रहा हूँ incognito mode में, फटी पड़ी है, कैसे करेंगे? This dude is, I've texted him on Facebook कि hey bro, do you smoke weed? He's like yeah, he gave me his number. So then I went to his place. मुझे पता था कि फूकने से पहले munchies use करनी होती हैं. So मैं दुकान पे जाके I bought like all kinds of chocolates and shit. Now I smoked cigarettes before, but he said कि फूकने के लिए आपको ऐसे अंदर लेके रखना होता है. Because you're as a kid you're a mouth fag or whatever. So the 3 joints, nothing happened. The 4th he's like बहुत हो गया, उसने फिर चरस का टुकड़ा तोड़ा and instantly it hit me. My eyes got slightly dilated. I opened my eyes and I felt differently. And he was playing some music and I felt the music intensely. He's like, bro, आराम से late के trip कर ले. So that was my first experience, and I felt, like you said, very much in the present moment. Very much, I felt like what a magical feeling. No stress in my body, and I could trip. Fast forward 10, 12 years later, I speak to many of my friends who now get high, and it's not relaxation. Like, if you smoke weed for very long, the high saturates, which is something you cover in the book.
Yeah. I mean, it's the way I look at it. Anything that you do too much, you become dependent to it, and you need more of. Now, whether cannabis or not is addictive is like an ongoing thing that scientists and researchers are constantly finding new information about. Where it stands is that it's not chemically addictive the way that drugs like cocaine or heroin or opioids are, but it can make you dependent to the feeling of being high.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is, say that there's someone who's a stoner who gets high every day. If for whatever reason they have to stop tomorrow, it will make them uncomfortable because now the habit has changed. But it's not going to now. If you do the same thing for this book, I don't know if you've reached that far. But I spoke to a bunch of people who were ex-heroin addicts.
Yeah, I reached that. Yeah.
Who were, and for them, they need chemical intervention to actually get off their addiction. Yeah. They are puking everywhere. Their bodies are giving up on them. It is a real struggle to get sober and clean from that addiction. So to go back to what you were saying, anything you do too much of, I think a dependence builds. It's the same way. If I'm eating, I think of coffee a lot. When I'm in the US, वहाँ पे Americans, they drink just pure jet black coffee, no sugar.
Yeah, or is that Dunkin' Donut cup? Yeah,
it's very strong. Yeah. और यहाँ पे, me growing up in India, coffee जो मिलती थी, but light coffee मिलती थी, In the beginning, I didn't like it. I didn't like the American style black coffee. Now, on like stressful days, I need a lot of black coffee sometimes, and it's a dependence. It's something that's it's happened to me because I started having it often enough to not be to not be affected by the weak mal anymore when it comes to the weak mal of the coffee. So I think it's the same thing, and I feel I mean, I feel moderation is really useful in everything, you know.
Yeah, I've seen, I mean, this is very anecdotal, but I've seen that some people can handle their cannabis very well. Then there is this stupid trope that happens to the best of us when we first do it. कि इससे मैं और creative बनूंगा. And I think that's largely been disproven. Sure, you can have wild thoughts, but I don't see why that will make you more creative, especially when you have to do something intellectually demanding. Right? I don't, like, if you think that you're going to be a better artist because you're smoking and drawing high. It's proven that, I mean, I don't know if you write your books with that kind of discipline where you get high and then you write a book because you're going to be all over the place. The same as आप किताब पढ़ने की कोशिश कर रहे थे फूक के. Anyone who's smoked and tried to read something, it's practically impossible. You're trying to be productive on a drug that's supposed to take you elsewhere, right? So you also describe this feeling of resisting when you're getting high in India, experiencing this, resisting the high and then sort of letting loose. Did you encounter people who could really enjoy their trips?
Yeah. I've met people who have amazing trips, for whom it's because, you know, if your maqsad is just to enjoy the trip, it's very easy to enjoy the trip. If you are putting so much weight on it, if you're thinking कि अब मैं ये करके ये 5-6 task complete करूँगा, like you want to go on a Harold and Kumar adventure, you know, like so I think that adds the stress to it. But if your whole point is कि it's me and my friends and we're gonna get high and we're gonna enjoy it, like if it's a pointless thing, I know people for whom it's only bought them Anand. You know, it's only bought them bliss.
Yeah, and before we get to the historical use of cannabis in the country, I want to go back to the heroin addicts. Because there is one thing that perhaps many of the classes in the country, as opposed to the masses or the underclasses, the classes will have access to superior quality drugs, right? They will have access to certain luxury style drugs. Perhaps, conversations are rife about, people in Bollywood having the best cocaine or something like that. So here, it's very funny that you mentioned that now in Delhi you can get a Malana tea for 5,000 rupees. The economics is very admirable because I don't think anyone has gone that deep, right? But here's what happens, Karan. ये होता है कि आप कोई मलाना टी खरीद सकता है 5,000 रुपए की दिल्ली के अंदर, एक तोला चरस. लेकिन जो भी लोग ऑटो वाले होते हैं, रिक्शे वाले होते हैं, आप कभी जाओ, आपको एक बदबूदार से गांजे की महक आ रही होती है जो मोस्टली स्पाइक्ड होता है.
Yes.
And I think what most people have a lot of the classes have this belief that marijuana is supposed to be a revolutionary drug and we should legalize and whatnot. They don't understand the consequences of how a lot of India treats it as just nashe, as probably even a bigger gateway to other things.
Yes.
कि आप अगर घटिया गांजा पीते हो, आप रेगुलरली गांजा पीते हो to cope, उसके बाद आप स्मैक भी कर सकते हो, जर्दा भी कर सकते हो. The gateway is very clear. It's in the same category. It's not like I'm a billionaire, but I also get high, so it's cool, right? But then every other hard drug is bad. It isn't that demarcation that we have in our classes, right? So what was your experience meeting these drug addicts? And what was the role of cannabis in all of this?
That's an amazing question because, again, if you look at the chemical research, the gateway theory has been debunked. Like there's no actual chemical need for only cannabis smoker to then want other drugs, to want cocaine or want brown sugar or want anything else. But what happens in India, that this is, jitna bhi log theorize karne, on the street level, what happens is that when a young person is having access to ganja and, he buy a little bit of for 10 rupees and he'll get high. What the dealers often do and especially this is my experience in interviewing people who met dealers in Delhi who were addicted to both. And basically almost every single brown sugar addict that I spoke to started off with ganja. Because what happens is that the dealer then says, ye 10 rupees ka ye high hai, 20 rupees ka ye foreign high le lo, ye usse better hai.
And it's just highs. It's just nasha. It isn't like nasha, they don't know the chemical composition. Isi kya counterculture hai, nothing.
They're told ki ye brown hai, ye le lo. And so it's so easy because it's the peddlers who then hook them on, because at the end of the day, the person, especially the large amount of people I interviewed were from very poor backgrounds. For them, they want the nasha. उनको वो इतना नहीं सोच रहे हैं कि मुझे इसका हाई ज़्यादा होगा कम होगा. What can they afford and can this nasha deliver? So I think this is how a lot of them. I mean, my idealistic hope is always कि गांजे से ऊपर मत जाओ. This is ये ठीक है. ठीक ये भी नहीं है. Let's be clear, like nothing is ठीक if you do too much.
Yeah, it's a choice that people make. Yeah.
But इसके आगे जाना is a very dangerous step.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, people do it. And no, and now what you're talking about, the class part, the more expensive drugs, the richer man's drugs, whether it's cocaine, whether it's MDMA, ecstasy.
Right.
They come in a completely different tier, because I think to a lot of users of these expensive drugs, for a lot of coke users, for example, I'm generalizing.
Yeah.
They probably consider ganja to be a dirty poor man's drug. They think कि ये तो एक सस्ता street level वाला drug है. ये असली drug बना, you know.
Yeah. So it's also true, by the way. Sorry, like just to cut you off there. It's also true in elite circles where they look down on marijuana, ganja, but really prefer this Malana tea, this cream, this Charas, because it's more expensive, it's superior. Yeah, just that.
That's also true, because it's for all the things you said. And now you mentioned the OG. And now what's happened is, and this happened basically between me writing the last chapter of my book to now it getting published. Over the last year and a half, ever since Thailand decriminalized the use of cannabis, a lot of this OG Kush, which is the kind of cannabis that is made in labs, that is made with, like, they can actually control the THC level in this and really make it high, increase it to a level that's unnatural, you know, and that's coming to India. Now that is what I feel that's considered the cool thing for the people who can afford it to do. You know, if you can afford it, why would you have the street level Malana cream? You have the OG now.
Yeah, it's 100% true. In fact, let me just quote something from the book, which I found is perhaps, now I'm going to use this again and again in my life. Because पहली बार किसी ने आके बात करी. As someone who's used this in the past, I have, well, excuse my ignorance, but I've never come across anyone, a journalist, perhaps even a user, talk about the problem with unregulated banned marijuana that is pervading our streets. And the lack of knowledge that comes from both the classes and the masses who are incapable of reading the literature and just chase the high. I met such astoundingly successful people smoking 50 rupee ganja laced with all kinds of shit. Because, whatever. And you can see over time when they do it, the symptoms become worse. Like jitne bhi wo jo marijuana scaring propaganda hota na, some of that shit happens to them. Not because they're smoking just marijuana, it's because they're smoking lace shit. So I'm going to read this out. You say, spiked charas in India usually feels powdery or leaves a strong black imprint, signs of shoe polish. When crumbled between the fingers, spiked ganja may have excessive seeds or be brownish in color. The smoke itself will feel metallic and rough. Instead of a blissful high, the adulterated mal can be a precursor to a nightmare, resulting in dizziness, throat pains, sleep disturbances, nausea, and in the worst cases, severe illnesses, infections, and hallucinations. This is the first time I've come across someone talking about the massive unregulated cannabis problem we have in the country.
Yeah. And I think this is part of the reason why there is, beyond the taboo of ganjeri hai, tum will be get high.
Yeah.
It is, I can theorize, you know, in the beautiful ways कि हाँ ये blissful चीज़ है, अच्छी, you know, not अच्छी चीज़ है, but like it's supposed to make you happy.
Sure.
It's supposed to bring you joy. But a beach में I cannot control the dealer because it's an unregulated market. The dealer will try to make your tola of charas heavy by putting shoe polish in it, by putting rat poison in it, by putting X amount of things, and it ends up giving people a bad high and ends up leaving people with a very bad perspective of what cannabis is or what cannabis should be at its purest level.
Yeah, you and I have both been in America and we both have tried cannabis there. For all the things that it can possibly do, as in it's strong, the last thing you have to worry about is it being laced with something because of the regulation, right? So
I'll clarify. I have not tried cannabis in America. Actually, I have never broken the law anywhere.
Okay, sure. Sounds good. No, I mean, of course, you've tried it perhaps where it's legal. I can tell you for a fact, when I used to live with someone who used to regularly source cannabis right before it got legalized in America. And जैसे ही Boston में legalize हुआ in the city of Brookline, they didn't legalize it in Boston, उन्होंने Brookline में legalize करा. They converted an old bank into this first legal cannabis place. I thought कि सिर्फ stoner बच्चे जाएंगे वहाँ पे फूकने के लिए. To my surprise, people who thought कि ये taboo है, construction worker से लेके अमीर आदमी सूट में there was a line of all kinds of people. And I was very surprised that American society really wanted to try it. They just needed something to legalize it. And just like everyone else, I went and bought it. I just think that's what legalization and regulation can do. Of course, when you were researching for this book and meeting different people, for cannabis advocacy, what did you find? Where is the state of our laws so far? Have you made any progress under legalization, recreational legalization, medical legalization?
So we sort of touched on this already. Uttarakhand has made some exceptions to the NDPS law. Himachal has just given this. In states like Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Manipur, they have some research and development laws where you can actually, they have started early forms of R&D. Jammu and Kashmir is doing it, at the IIM. So I think these places are doing it, but again, this is very limited. It's very limited in scope. Uttarakhand is probably the furthest ahead, where now what we see in the market as CBD, the CBDs that has been marketed, and CBD has become quite common now around India. Even my book, there's a CBD company that is partnering for some events for my book, and it's a completely above board legal thing. CBD, for those who may not have read the book yet or may not be clear, it is another compound in the cannabis plant.
The non-psychoactive compound.
Does it THC hai, CBD bhi hai. And CBD doesn't get you high, but it does relax you, it calms you down, it takes away anxiety.
Yeah.
And it's used a lot medicinally for pain, for nausea, for pets who have nausea issues. So in that sense, a lot of CBD in India is now being sourced from Uttarakhand. These hemp farms in Uttarakhand, these Bhaang farms, where it is legal now. So this is the scene so far. Now, beyond all this, there are some people who are very interested in advocating for legalization. I think the loudest or the most progress that has been made has been by the Great Legalization Movement, GLM India.
Okay.
Started by this guy named Vicky Warora. I hope I'm saying his name right. And he has been at the forefront of this for about 7 or 8 years. And he's very influenced by the cannabis advocates in the West. And he's very serious about the medicinal sort of impact and medicinal boon cannabis can have, to help with all kinds of different ailments, and specifically with cancer and cancer pain. So he's one of these people, and there's so many others. There's cannabis advocates. There's lawyers like Khagesh Gautam, who I have quoted a lot in my book, who have written books about seeing it from the purely legal side of how will it be possible to actually decriminalize ganja. There've been politicians who have actually spoken about it. The funny thing about cannabis is that it's actually on both sides of the Indian political spectrum. It's equally beloved or be hated. Beloved का opposite जो भी है.
Be hated is a good word.
जो मेरे मन में आ गया. But in the sense that there's people on both sides who think it's okay, and there's people on both sides who are afraid of it.
Yeah, I was very surprised to see that. Typically, you would assume that someone from the BJP would take a hardline anti-ganja stance, but I think you mentioned one of the ministers saying that it's like a medicine for us. Yeah,
and because they're realizing that it's an easy spiritual point to score, because almost everywhere even now the hemp conference, there's an annual hemp conference that takes place, and so much of their messaging is around the fact that this is an Ayurvedic Vijaya, it's a spiritual connection, because they know that if they do that, they're a little bit safe. Even the hemp conference, the chief guest was a BJP politician.
5% of the Shaivites donors to voter bank, perhaps they can capture.
They can capture it, na? And then on the other side, like one of the most progressive politicians in India was this person named Tatagati Satpathy from Odisha.
Okay.
And he was a journalist turned politician, and now he's gone back to journalism. And he was the first to really openly say in his interviews and his AMAs that, I've tried it in my youth. It's not that big a deal. It's up to you.
It's very prevalent in Odisha. At one point, Biju Patnaik, I think it was him, did a Reddit AMA. He was asked what his favorite album was. He said Pink Floyd's Umagama, which is saying something for a
deep cut,
right? Like that's a deep cut.
He can have my vote. I don't even vote in Odisha, but based on that,
मतलब मेरी आंखें पड़ गई थी. It was something that was shared on Facebook at one point, and me and my friends kept commenting on it. We can't believe this. We can't believe some shit like that. Second thing he mentioned is someone asked him, "Do you smoke weed?" He's like, "Yeah, it's perfectly legal. We have our government licensed shops and whatnot." So there are some politicians who are very pro it. I think the issue is awareness. I think we're really at that level where हर नशा बुरा है, लीगल हमने दो नशे कर रखे हैं, वो है दारू और सिगरेट, यही पियो, यही कॉमन एक्सेप्टेबल नशे हैं. आई थिंक दैट्स द इशू.
Yeah, and the messaging is a big problem because at the end of the day, I also want to be careful. Like, neither of us are saying this is safe for you.
Sure,
You know,
sure, yeah.
And it's about, in a different way. I consider it about the same level as alcohol. I personally think alcohol is more dangerous.
Yeah.
Because it's just real life experience. It can hurt your body more, and people make more reckless decisions when they're drunk.
Alcoholism is a very real thing, and it is prevalent in many parts of our country where there is rampant unemployment, and it leads to far more ruin. Sure,
Yeah.
that's true.
And what's happened is that another part of my book is I went to a lot of places which are dry states. Where alcohol is not allowed. Like specifically when I spent time in the Northeast, I spent a lot of time researching this project in Nagaland and Manipur, and really that was my favorite part of my travels. It was that part, those states. Now those are dry states, and what's happened is it's not stopped people from drinking. It's people are just drinking kacha daru the same way people are smoking, a spiked charas or whatever, and they're getting really sick. They're dying. So it's. The regulation is very important, and I don't really know. I'm not the person who's I guess a vidwan enough to sort of like decide whether this is whether alcohol should be legal or not, or controlled or not. But there need to be controls. If you're gonna make something illegal or you make something legal, it helps to have controls because we want people to have the healthy stuff, the healthy mal, whether the or should I say the clean version of the unhealthy stuff, right? At least whether it's alcohol, whether it's ganja or whatever.
Yeah, let's talk about the religious aspects of cannabis in the country, and we will perhaps use some of the texts you've mentioned. सबसे बड़ा तो जो stereotype वो ये है कि this is what I was propagated. This is what I was told when I was first considering whether I should smoke it or not. शिव जी भी तो पीते थे, और आप देखते हो अभी there are many images of like a graphic Shiva with a beard smoking a chillum. So historically, I'm always curious: is he actually a stoner at some point? Do they make the god Shiv stoner उनको बनाते हैं, or is it just some figment of an imagination to perhaps okay a behavior that is taboo? I always wonder. In your research, what did you find out?
So I'll first answer the very interesting question about कि whether he was always a stoner or कि हमने उनको stoner बनाया. My answer is कि हमने उन्हें बनाया. Like I'm an atheist, so to me, like we made Shiva in our image. Right. We gave him the properties that we consider to be the properties of like a kind of man that we admire.
Yeah, nomadic warrior with like friends for gauls and like destroyer, dancer.
He's just a chill dude. Like he's honestly like...
he's just a chill guy.
He's a chill guy, man. Like I would love to hang out with him, even as someone who's an atheist, because I just think he's an awesome guy. Like but he's also a very dangerous guy. Like you don't want to fuck with him, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So I think now that said, the story goes that yes, in a lot of Hindu scriptures and Hindu mythologies, he is a stoner god in a way. I mean, do you know the story of the Samudra Mathana?
Yes,
the churning of the ocean.
The churning of the ocean, yeah.
And I mentioned this in my book where the gods and the devas and asuras are fighting for the Amrit, और Amrit लेके Garuda भाग जाता है, और in this hunt for Amrit, the poison also comes out called Hala Hala. And Hala Hala is now going to poison the entire cosmos. And Shiva comes to the rescue and he swallows it all up. He's like, man, don't worry, I got it. And this is why Shiva's neck turns blue. This is why he's Neelkant. The only thing that helps him soothe down the pain of Hala Hala is Bhaang. So he takes some Bhaang and it makes him feel better. And all of a sudden everyone's like, dekho, like this is such a wonderful thing. It takes away the pain of the poison, which is, all these mythologies come from some truth. They come from the fact that this must have been used medicinally by ancient Indians.
Yeah.
They made a story around it to make people believe that, this is something that soothes your pain. And similarly, of course, I've also quoted the Atharva Veda, which is known as the Veda of the Ayurveda, or the medicinal scriptures of Indian history. This is written, 3,000 years ago or something, where Bhaang is named as among the, the plants or the jari booties, so to say, that
the 5 healing jari booties.
The 5 healing jari booties that make up soma, and soma is like this great healer, something that can make you immortal. It's like a fictional thing. So this has been part of our, history. I think what they meant is they उस ज़माने में they went to whatever they could for health. They didn't have we didn't have doctors who could research things. But they knew their knowledge. They knew what helps them. They knew what harms them, and this is something that helps them. So they made these stories about the healthy things, and they have passed on for hundreds of years, thousands of years.
So, soma is something very interesting because soma ka bar passages mein mention aata hai. Many contemporary commentators on Hinduism and our books always bring up soma as some kind of elixir. The god Indra, who I actually have a picture of right here, was a deep addict of soma.
Okay.
Because he wanted unquenchable power. But some people say it's like a psychedelic. I know Aldous Huxley mentioned soma in his book, The Island. It's very fascinating because you even say that in the 18th century CE, some Sanskrit medicinal text also calls it an anti-phlegmatic. Did you find other passages, other historical references for ganja or cannabis?
The historical references, do you mean in Indian scriptures?
In Indian scriptures, sure.
So I think the famous one is the Sushrata Samhita.
Okay.
And I think that's an 8th century scripture, which again, the funny thing is that most of this scriptural stuff is just, it's almost like a recipe or a recipe on how to make medicine.
Got it.
So it's not even telling you ki like...
It's not prescriptive, ki ye fuko, ye iski wo hai.
And it's not poetic. It's not like trying to philosophize ki iska matlab kya hota hai. It's like bimar ho, ye dawai lo. And I think that's what the same way we used to think of neem as a dawai or anything.
It's like it's an alchemical text.
Yeah. So I think this existed and I mean one of my main sort of goals with this book was to sort of reclaim cannabis as an Indian thing.
Yeah.
It's not. Now I'm not going to go in the history of where it actually was found. I mean, historically, I think it was proven that China had the first cannabis plants growth. I've interviewed people who have said nahi wo bhi India tha. Ab ye China tha, India tha, Arunachal tha. I'm not getting into that side of the politics of it. But my point is culturally India is home to it. Whatever is the actual birth of it, it's culturally an Indian thing. The same way I considered yoga an Indian thing. And it's something that I feel we should at least, if you don't want to celebrate it, at least be aware of it. That we gave this to the world, or at least the cultural importance of it.
That's true. I think I was in Hampi once, a long time ago. This is about, I think, 8 years ago. And I found myself at this temple, all the way up in a hill, जहाँ पे एक self-proclaimed god रहता था.
अच्छा, great.
ठीक है, he said he's a self-proclaimed god. Now, of course, we had on our person some illicit substances in Hampi, scored through our very nice auto driver. And when he saw we were from Delhi and we had those substances that he couldn't find, he said, come be my guest.
Achha.
So imagine my surprise, there are no devotees yet. It's me, this self-proclaimed god man, another friend, and this visiting Bengali mendicant Baba, who's fawning over this god man and saying, ye to Sakshat Bhagwan hai, ye to Sakshat Bhagwan hai, because he wants, you want more water? Because he wants a place to stay. Now, each of these guys had their own chillum. And I didn't understand कि chillum के अंदर classes वाला game चलता है. Where like, apparently the thing is, आप अगर chillum पी रहे हो और किसी बाबा की chillum है, तो आप उसकी साफी से नहीं पी सकते.
Okay.
I don't know if you have encountered this in your research. So as we were, partaking, this shit was so strong, I had to fall back and say, listen, with all due respect, can I just fall back? It's too strong for me. And this guy was mesmerized. For months, he kept calling us, कि आप आओ, फिर visit करो, फिर visit करो. But what struck to my mind is कि वो किस तरह से चिलम का जो पूरा concept है, वो अपनी साफी को sacred मानते हैं. That the, I guess the Pandit class decides कि भाई हम अपनी साफी किसी और को नहीं देंगे. So he was there, I saw some caste-based dynamics. Even in this supposed like elixir to heaven or whatnot. I mean, did you encounter something like that?
That's extremely interesting. Like that's kind of fascinating to me. And I personally didn't encounter it. because my encounter with chillam smokers, and it's usually a group. You get a group of people, the chillam is going the same way. The friends in the West will do a puff pass.
Yeah.
They do a puff pass of a chillam, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who's on your side. You pass it to the person who will come around to you.
Yeah.
Now that said, I can afford to say this and observe this because I myself am not the lowest caste.
Yeah.
So to me, like I'm sure if you ask this question of a person who's actually felt that, they will probably have a different experience. Like they will probably have observed things about the passing and about somebody putting the mouth on the same place that a different caste has been. They might see that sensitivity.
Yeah.
I didn't see it, but I'm not supposed to see it. I'm like that is the privilege I have of not being the lowest caste.
Yeah, for me it was very fascinating that how joints are actually an anti-caste movement, because once you smoke joints, you just like if someone is smoking joints, it's just unanimously across the room. But because वो religious segment, वो religious जगह पे था, हर पंडित की अपनी साफी और आपको साधारण साफी पीनी पड़ेगी. वो for me it was like I mean it's that segregation for something that it's a uniting activity. And so because I'm in a temple corridor, I found that anyway, then the devotees came and they all started worshipping him, and this dude is just high sitting there. And that was my experience.
That's a fascinating observation, because as I said, like I would love to hear the answer of someone who's a lower caste to this question, because they would answer it more honestly than I would.
Sure. In your book you also talk about ki contemporarily what is happening for cannabis-based treatments. You describe this organization called Ayurcann, which is a cannabis wellness ashram.
Yes.
For all of my extremely rich and jinka has bahut paisa hai, you can probably go there. But for me, what struck out to me was you said that it's actually more expensive than an average cancer treatment, right?
I don't know what an average cancer treatment is, but it was more expensive than their usual Ayurvedic treatments.
So what is this ashram? What do they do?
They basically, they're a normal Ayurvedic sort of hospital where people go for months sometimes, and they'll do like full body cleanses, they'll for various ailments. They added this thing a couple of years ago called the Ayurcann therapies, and Ayurcann means Ayurveda cannabis, where they started using cannabis products, which were again the CBD products that were sourced from Uttarakhand, for some of their treatments. And they made the connection that, Ayurvedically, we have been using cannabis in Ayurvedic treatments for, thousands of years. We're just now trying to do it in a regulated way.
Right.
Beach mein, after the NDPS Act was passed, it was harder to procure cannabis. Ayurvedic doctors were still doing it. They're never going to tell you they were doing it, but they were still doing it like under the radar. They tried to do it over the table in the proper way. And basically just 2 days before I showed up, the excise department in Kerala came and took all of their cannabis products, because they didn't quite realize the difference between THC high hai, CBD high hai, kya legal hai, kya nahi hai. It was just the fact that this was a cannabis product. So it was confiscated, and it continues to be confiscated up till this day. And actually, I'm still waiting to hear from them to hear whether like that has changed or not. So this is the situation in that Ayurvedic hospital.
Yeah, in your book, throughout the book, आप बताते हो कि बहुत सारे drug raids वगैरह आपने capture करी हैं, where some of these are obviously like super illegal, but some of them are just people trying to make do with something that is legal, correct?
Yeah.
Even you mentioned कि आपके जो ये farmers थे जिनका वो 0.3% से ऊपर हो जाता है अगर cannabis, तो उनके farm जला देते हैं या raid कर देते हैं, what happens?
हाँ, ये होता है, वो farm जला देंगे, raid कर देंगे. Honestly, 90% of these raids are just done just to show कि हमने कुछ किया है. We've heard there's a drug menace, and this happens a lot, especially in Andhra, Odisha, where now that corridor has become the biggest producer of illicit ganja that goes around in India.
Yeah.
More than the Himachal Uttarakhand corridor. I will follow, my Google alerts about cannabis in India. हफ्ते में 2-3 बार आ जाएगा, like, X many acres have been burned by authorities. And these are still a small number considering how much ganja is actually growing in India. But they have to do it and publicize it to show कि हमने कुछ किया. We are fighting this war. And it's actually become, the last 4 or 5 years, they have really taken this into overdrive. The Indian government announced that by 2047, our 100 years of independence, they want to make India 100% drug-free, which is a very hilarious 3 words from me to hear, 100% 4 words, jo bhi hai, never going to happen. Like you cannot get a country drug free because the meaning of drug could mean, acha, because a pharmaceutical drug is a drug if I have too much.
Yeah.
If I'm having my cough syrup, my friends in school used to get completely high on cough syrup. That was the easy drug for them. Ab wo cough syrup illegal ho gayi hai, Corex naam tha uska. So similarly with ganja, like I almost feel this is such a waste of potential to just go out and burn these things instead of actually seeing what we can do with it. But
yeah, definitions are a problem because आप drugs के अंदर किस चीज को लेके आओगे, like you said, and we're not a Singapore. We're not a small island with a tightly one governed, one party system, and we have many borders. I hope they figure out Punjab, but it seems very challenging.
Yeah.
You've got drugs. If you talk about illegal drugs at dealer level quantities, you've got drugs coming in from that. You've got the Myanmar corridor, right? I'm sure like there's drugs coming in from our coast ports as well, probably.
Yes.
ऐसे तो बहुत मुश्किल है 2047 तक कर लेना. And then what do you do with the social progressive movements? You see what is happening now in the tier 1 cities. People have moved on from really cheap alcohol, from spirits to craft beers to wines and now cocktails. As the Indian consumers are also demanding a better and better high, let's just say, it seems practically impossible that conversation is not going to go to cannabis legalization.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you met like someone called, I think Hempwati. You met Hempwati?
Yes, Priya Mishra.
Yeah, Priya Mishra. She mentioned that her cancers or tuberculosis symptoms were massively healed.
Yes.
After using medicinal cannabis. How can you deny that lobby? That's a very big lobby of people who will actually be benefited from using cannabis.
I think the conversation around this is like the fact to have something like drug free, and when I mean drugs, I mean we're talking specifically, let's talk about ganja, let's stick with that. I think we're going about it the wrong way, because what you're doing is that you're actually taking away something that could be has a lot more nuance.
It could be a $10 million industry. Just be a capitalist and think about it like that.
There's a lot more nuance to this, and I mean the model I use in my book in India where it's working. So Sikkim has its own proposition of an NDPS Act. It's called the SADA Act, the Sikkim Anti-Drug something, and they don't look at drug users. And we're talking about we're not talking about people who have large amounts to sell it. We're talking about users who are caught with a few joints. They or even harder drug users, like people who use brown sugar and all. They don't look at them as criminals. They look at them as people who need help. They look at them as victims, and they help rehabilitate them, and they help. So it's like it's a very sort of positive way of looking at change. And what they've actually done is that they have seen the numbers of addicts really go down since the SADA was implemented in Sikkim. And I feel that, again, the SADA is not a perfect thing, nothing is. But I feel we need a little bit more creativity in the NDPS Act to deal with this ganja quote unquote problem, because it is everywhere in India. It is the number one illicit substance used in India, unless you count alcohol, wherever you count it.
Yeah.
It's in cities like Bombay, it is the number one thing under the NDPS Act which people are arrested in.
Yeah.
And it's for holding a little bit of weed here and there. Because of we talked about the Andhra-Odisha border, right? Andhra-Odisha regions. Because there's such a huge mafia there of ganja growth. The central jail in Visakhapatnam, and I spent a lot of time in Vizag for this project. It's filled with over 80% transporters. People who they were not the growers, they're not the mafia, they're not the users. They are just like poor people who need the money to transport the drug from point A to point B. I'm not saying what they're doing is not a crime. It is a crime. But at the same time, like I feel that we are not going after the right... we're not solving the right problem here. We are trying to get the numbers. We're trying to say if we arrested X amount of people. It's not actually bringing the consumption of the drugs, and the worst part of it, which is you mentioned, despite the unregulated consumption of the drug, it's not helping that at all.
How far did you penetrate these drugs lines? Like, did you encounter peddlers and dealers yourself who...
Yes.
Yeah, and what were those interviews like when you were trying to capture information from the book?
They were normal, because, to them, it's like, this is just the way of life. This is what we do. Nobody was really afraid at that thing to talk to me about the fact that they're peddlers. In Nagaland, I met peddlers. In Delhi, I met peddlers. And no one was really considering it a big taboo. They're like, हाँ, ये हम करते हैं, हमें करना है तो करेंगे. And especially after the pandemic, when a lot of people's work became, a lot of people became kind of like part-time workers, you know. A lot of people turned to the gig economy. In Delhi, you may have heard like so many of the peddlers are also the people who are the gig economy, who are either delivering your Zomato, Swiggy, delivering your Amazon.
We fast, that's a thing. They do it over We Fast, yeah.
Because they have the ultimate means. They have a scooter or a motorbike, they have a baksa, they have an Amazon box. The Amazon box can contain new shoes or it can contain your ganja. Who is to know? You know what's in it. So in the sense, the dealers, you know, I didn't think of them as the problem. And similarly, they were not afraid of talking to me about it, because we all know that the problem is bigger than them. They are just the mule in between a larger problem.
Who's the biggest problem in this? Like true drug dens? Because jo yahan pe the difference comes when, like, if you've got a drug den, if you're a proper drug dealer, trust me, dude, you're not going to make money from cannabis. You're going to make money from the hard drugs.
Yes.
So it's going to be one of the many items in your inventory.
And this is why peddlers, what we were talking about earlier, how it became a gateway drug. Peddlers would encourage the cheap cannabis, and then it's not going to make them rich. So then वो धीरे धीरे जाएंगे, बोलेंगे थोड़ा सा brown try कर लो, थोड़ा सा चिट्टा try कर लो. You know, and this is why now you mentioned Punjab, Haryana, Kashmir, like there is a huge like drug problem.
What is chitta exactly, by the way?
As far as I know, I think chitta is opioid heroin, sort of. It is made of heroin poppy, but it's then उसमें और कुछ chemical डाल के उसको बनाया जाता है. That as far as I know, and it's something I think people shoot up. But I think you can also smoke it.
Okay.
Now this was not, I like resisted. मुझे पता था कि the moment I start to open my जो मेरा circular diagram है outside of cannabis.
You didn't want to do gateway research.
I didn't want to do gateway research क्योंकि ये for you किताब out of control हो जाती है. I had to stick to, and it was very easy to gateway research because almost, as I said, like all the serious dependents and people whose life has been spoiled by starting with cannabis. They all went to harder drugs, you know. And I wanted to at least address that fact कि हमने जो भी cannabis के बारे में अच्छी चीजें बोल दी, let's not forget कि it has spoiled a lot of people's lives in this country.
Sure.
And it's because of these peddlers who you rightfully said they need to make the real money.
Did you end up making, आप कभी इस दौरान में आप किताब की रिसर्च के टाइम पे आप लॉ मेकर से मिले, आपने लॉ मेकर से बात करी कि भाई आपकी क्या राय है कैनबिस को लेके, आप कहाँ बंधे हुए हो, आपकी what do you think about this?
हाँ, लॉ मेकर से बात की, एंड स्पेसिफिकली द वन पर्सन जिसकी मैंने किताब पढ़ी और उनको कोट किया, उनको इंटरव्यू किया, हिज नेम इज खागेश गौतम. ही इज़ अ लॉ प्रोफेसर बेस्ड इन हरियाणा ओनली, रोहतक. ही टीचेज एट अ यूनिवर्सिटी एंड ही रोट दिस बुक कॉल्ड कैनबिस इंडिका Perception versus Reality. I think that's the name of the book, and it's an academic, it's a legal perspective into what cannabis decriminalization could look like, and he's actually taught college courses about cannabis decriminalization.
That's fascinating.
And so he's just, I feel there's more others like him, but he's the one who's, you know, I think has communicated it best. And you know, he makes really good points. I think one of the main points he's made is that the NDPS law in itself, जो 1985 में law बना है, which is now we call it the narcotics law, it was a mistake in the sense कि they didn't quite understand the difference between opium and cannabis. उन लोगों ने सबको एक साथ क्लब कर दिया और the same things, हर चीज़ नशा है, you know. And he actually gives proof of the arguments made in 1985 by you know, the members of parliament, where they mistakenly said, they mixed up, as they were arguing for ganja, they said opium, or as they were saying opium, they mixed up ganja, because they didn't even think that there's a difference between the two. So that was the first point he made, that from its very inception, the NDPS Act made an error. And the other thing he said was, look, there's so much economic potential here. He talked about the Himachal decriminalization potential long before this year. ये तो हमने September में हुआ है. He was talking about it several years ago कि हिमाचल में हर जगह मिलता है. You go to the Parvati Valley and it's so easy to get
it actually attracts tons of tourism to our country. आपको
Yeah.
at least airfare मिलता है, आपको lodging मिलती है, right? Without that, I doubt that place would thrive as much.
It used to be, Parvati Valley used to be the apple belt of the country.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks of that as much anymore. Even in my research, I was surprised. अच्छा यहाँ सेब भी अच्छे मिलते हैं. Like, ये नहीं पता था मुझे. I should try one next time.
Yeah, but so you went to the nexus, like where the fabled place. मतलब मैंने भी M-Cream देखी थी वैसे, because when I was a kid I was very fascinated कि ओ मतलब इन्होंने मलाना पे ये बना दी, because these were mythical things for us, being able to, and you rightly say in your book, for many it's a rite of passage to be able to go and travel to मलाना and say कि भाई वाओ यहाँ पे वो cafes हैं, वो मैगी मिलेगी, वहाँ pancake होता है, and everyone's lighting up, and the law seems to do nothing there. It's like, but your experience living in around Malana, how much of the whole fact that these villagers are descended from Alexander, that untouchability, what was that experience? I haven't never been to Malana, by the way.
There is something mystical about it, क्योंकि मुझे पता है कि mystical होगा और उनको पता है कि मुझे mystical लगेगा. Like it's sort of this.
I see.
It's like it's this inherent unspoken understanding कि let's all live in this delusion together. You know, the delusion of mysticism, and it helps. Now, after all, if you're on holiday anywhere, you want to pretend that it's what you're having a magical experience. One example I could give you is, again, I'm from Varanasi, which is Banaras gets. Sorry if you guys don't know, Varanasi, Banaras, same place. Banaras gets the most domestic tourism in this country, and it has been for quite a while. People who come to Banaras and they take a boat by the ghats, they see the Ganga Aarti. It's a magical, life-changing experience for some people. They think like look at the temples, look at this beautiful ghats, look at the river. I look at it, हाँ यार आज मूड किया घाट पे चले जाओ, बैठ जाओ, चाय पी के वापस आ जाओ. It's not a big deal for me. So I think like I feel the similarly about Malana. Like a person coming in is expecting magic, and the locals there are expecting to deliver magic. The only thing is that they don't always have the best relationship with tourists, because they also don't want this. It's kind of funny. Like they know what pays the bills, but they don't want that to be the reputation of it.
Of course,
yeah. We are not just a place to get stoned in.
Yeah.
But that is what is really happening. You know?
Yeah, like I mean I've traveled abroad, लेकिन मेरा पहला encounter Israeli nationality से ही पहाड़ों में हुआ.
हाँ जी.
And famously in Delhi they say हम ऊपर जा रहे हैं. Like something a slang I picked up growing up in and around the NCR area was कि ऊपर चलेगा. It wasn't like an indication to get high or to smoke up. It simply meant let's take a trip, let's take a bus, let's get there. That shady Himachal tourism bus, whatever, Volvo लेके जाओ, पहुंचो बुंतर, पहुंचो बरशैनी, आपने तो mention कर रखा है पूरा वो that whole passage, and then arrive at one of the many homestays, villas, whatever, and just spend the days getting baked. It's such a popular tourist attraction for even people. Anyone who comes of age thinks कि एक बार तो वहाँ जाना है. And when they go up there, they're shocked by how pervasive cannabis is. Something they've only heard about or seen in festivals suddenly becomes conversation. Of course, there is also your experience. आपने ये भी describe करा कि it was also blown out of proportion, cannabis, in the Sushant Singh Rajput case, where you said that one of his cooks confessed before Sushant sir committed suicide. I rolled the marijuana cigarettes for him 3 days before, which were kept in a cigarette case in a cupboard. After suicide, the case was empty. This case of Sushant Singh Rajput committing suicide suddenly flung marijuana as a drug into national conversation. What was your coverage about this case? What did you sort of understand from this?
You could have asked me about the Israel-Palestine issue and it would be less controversial than this. This is a very, we were talking about this before we started. And
right.
The Sushant Singh Rajput case, to do with I found it, darkly amusing, because I know that this is, we're talking about a person at the heart of this. We're talking about a very tragic thing,
right?
And people sort of lost track of the tragedy. They needed something or someone to blame. ये कैसे हो सकता है? This young, handsome, successful actor, like how could he be depressed? How is that possible? And they blamed X amount of things. They blamed his manager, they blamed his girlfriend, and eventually a lot of the blame came upon his cannabis use, whether it was the joints he was rolling or whether it was the CBD he was using for his anxiety.
Oh, he was also using CBD?
He was doing CBD, and the CBD part also was then put under the scanner because people did not understand कि ये legal है. The CBD the Ria was putting into his chai or whatever. They made it part of the sansani thing that CBD भी कर रहा था, but CBD actually
CBD कर रहे हैं मतलब क्या होता है?
Exactly. And what the funny thing is that there's an Indian sort of union of, like, it's called PIMCHA, and PIMCHA responsible for the union of like hemp companies in India, and they said that after Sushant Singh's death, there was more positive interest in CBD than ever before in the months that followed, because despite all the negative press, people did their own research and they realized, oh, this is something that's actually can help us with our anxiety, stress, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But to go back to the Sushant Singh thing, like, you know, and I wrote about this in the book, depression is a very complicated thing. Like, I am not a mental health expert. I'm not a doctor.
And you can't bypass it by just saying, oh, it's a mere chemical imbalance, which is what some people do.
It could be so many things. बचपन में उसका क्या हुआ है मुझे नहीं पता. You know, what he's going through that time, what his health is like. There's so many other things. In some cases, yes, cannabis use and overuse and misuse of cannabis has known to cause extra stress and anxiety and depression. But in some cases, cannabis has also helped people in depression to get away from depression, you know. So my point basically is that we should not jump into answers to blame one thing or the other, you know, like it's another human being's life. Yeah. And I think we should respect कि like now मुझे ये ना underground वो नहीं पता कि इसके पीछे theories क्या हैं in the dark web of India.
Sure.
I'm just talking about what I know, you know.
Yeah. Fair. I think it was blown out of proportion, and we still have a lot of like anti-cannabis propaganda in the country. Some reasons are rightfully so because वो बहुत lower level पे जाके it spiked and it causes all kinds of problems. But a lot of it is just the fear that what will the populace do? Because if you really think about it, extreme alcoholism, even for like highly functioning rich people, is a very bad symptom. Like there is a stupid trope and वो बड़ा ऐसा cliche लगता है, but it is true that a stoner does not harm anyone, but perhaps themselves by smoking too much every now and then. It's a very Perhaps let me ask you this. What was the most difficult part about trying to write this book?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. And the most difficult part will be something that will actually surprise you. It doesn't have anything to do with the drug itself. I'm going to give you a very boring, like good father answer. It was being away from my daughter.
Sure.
And it was because like I had
getting high for research.
No comment. But it was just like I was away so much, and you know I was always on the road for this, and know, and I had this in my book. I think a lot of people will be actually surprised by my book because this is not a kind of academic look or the history of ganja. It's a very personal story.
Yeah.
It's like a travelogue of me going to places and me almost having self-reflection and existential crises within myself to find out कि मैं क्या कर रहा हूँ. मैं 40 साल का हो गया हूँ. Like, fuck am I doing with my life? You know. So I think that, but at the same, I say hardest part, but I think that quote unquote hardest part helped me write some of the most interesting parts of the book, which made it the most sort of unique to me. I think no one else could have written this book because no one else is me with that experience or with that, with that kind of perspective in it.
Yeah, no, I personally, some of my favorite passages in the book is, you mention, you go to a state, you talk about the cannabis culture, you talk about arriving there, then you take these small asides into historically what has been the case. You definitely talk about raids and laws. But there are these passages every now and then where you describe a bad trip, but you describe your own bad trip, if it ever happened.
Allegedly,
right? You describe how people want to use cannabis to get away from their stresses, right? And so all of these things, see, we're a world where we seek altered states. We've always wanted altered states. चाहे उसे हमें sex के through मिले, चाहे हमें alcohol के through मिले, चाहे हमें harder drugs के through मिले, or simply through having awe-inspiring experiences like doing a difficult hike or doing a difficult marathon, pushing ourselves. We're seekers of fun, wild, neurotransmittery type experiences. That is what the human race wants at the core. आप जब अपने basic procreation, basic खाना पीना सब कर लेते हो, right? And you sort of even move past your high order achievements कि I want to be a good father or I want to be successful. In the very micro nowness of the moment, what you're seeking is an altered state. A coffee that makes me jittery and like focused, right? A cigarette that makes me relax and perhaps a little bit more pensive. A drink that makes me calm down. We're constantly chasing that. So it was wonderful to read those passages because जब आपने you mentioned paranoia or like a bad trip, the kind of like low self-esteem, scary feeling that is was very, very well written.
Yeah, thanks. But I guess I'm glad my pain was useful. I'm glad you talked about this seeking altered states, because there was a friend of mine who I spoke to during while I was writing this book, and her perspective really थोड़ा सा मुझे हिला दिया. We're talking about this, I was talking about the work I'm doing and why I'm writing about like certain ways people want to escape and feel high. And she simply said like, why would I want to escape who I am? I love who I am. Like in just simple words, she made me think like, I guess a lot of us are very insecure about who we are on a day-to-day level. Sure. And very insecure about dealing with ourselves. Like actually just maybe bright light abhi shine kari na podcast wali, like the wide awakening of actually speaking to yourself as who you are, not lying to yourself, not self-deception, can be very painful because you realize who you are and who you're not. And I think that's why a lot of us, from whether it's travel, whether it's substances, whether it's like some people are addicted to relationships, they want to almost escape that version of themselves.
It's like the now is an escape as opposed to a state of rest. You escape to the now.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, right? And this is why like a lot of the book Ananda, like my idea of it was like, even though this book is about cannabis, it's actually about traveling. It's actually about going to another place, whether it's a physical travel, which the whole book is a travelogue, or it's a metaphysical travel of like the trips you're taking in your mind. I guess this is why it's called a trip now, to get high. Like you are tripping somewhere.
Right. Yeah. So what has been the response so far to the book?
It's quite early, and I feel that so far the response has been a lot of curiosity. We were talking about this earlier, where like even though people don't out and out talk about it, a lot of people in our country want to know more. Because as you brought it up, सबको पता है. या तो किसी ने, या तो they have used it themselves, या तो they have a perspective कि ये एक taboo चीज़ है या ये एक अच्छी चीज़ है, जो भी है. People are curious, and I think people want to know answers and they want to know more.
As a local man, I can attest to some of this because when we used to go to खोखास और हम बोलते थे कि हमें रोलिंग पेपर चाहिए, चाहे हम सिगरेट ही रोल कर रहे थे, राइट, whatever it was, भाई आसपास के लोग ऐसे देखते थे कि तुम लोग वो भर के सिगरेट पीते हो, and you'd be like, oh fuck, like I'm gonna get case. It was so taboo. मैं ऑडेसिटी देखता हूँ अब, भैया 2 बॉन्गची देना, because बॉन्गची is the biggest like brand right now, right, for all of this. भैया twice a day देना, या भैया और भी कोई Luis Figo. There's so many names. What is very interesting is Luis Figo.
Luis Figo is a great name.
Yeah. What is perhaps so surprising is the economics of the loose cigarette have begun to apply to the loose paper. I guarantee you, Karan, nowhere else in the world, आप अमेरिका में जाओगे, आप रॉ के रोलिंग पेपर खरीदोगे, आपको पूरे मिलेंगे, राइट? आपको ऑनलाइन ऑर्डर करोगे, पूरे मिलेंगे. आप यहाँ ब्लिंकिट पे ऑर्डर करोगे, पूरे मिलेंगे. सिर्फ खोखा ही ऐसा है जो इंडिया के यूज केस के हिसाब से, एंड दे आर सो क्लेवर, व्हाट दे हैव डन इज twice a day. It's on the fucking thing. So your ritual is set कि भाई एक बार सुबह, एक बार रात को, एक बार दोपहर को, एक बार शाम को. And people are like, भैया एक price देना, and they give it. Or they will literally take the rolling paper out of the thing and give it to loose. Wow. Whatever you say, the unorganized खोखा industry has adjusted.
Yeah. And not only that, what's interesting is that we had earlier talked about ना कि US में liberalized laws हो गए हैं. वहाँ पे तो there's a big industry of obviously legal cannabis, but also now all of this other stuff with cannabis, the rolling paper, pre-rolls, grinders, to pouches to keep your weed or whatever. One of the biggest American companies that makes these products has all their factories in Delhi NCR region.
Really?
And they are some of the biggest sort of producers of cones.
What are they called?
ये मैं check करके
Okay, no stress, no stress. We'll add.
But again, that is the irony of it. That in a country where it's technically illegal, is the biggest producer or one of the biggest producers of cones that now go west and are sold all over the world.
Well, yeah, there are many things to improve, and I think अगर हम ऐसी बातें करेंगे तो perhaps we can at least cause a change, because frankly, let me tell you, when you go and do more of these podcasts or interviews, I think people are still going to be very nervous कि यार इतना टैबू टॉपिक है, हम ऐसे कैसे ब्रोच करें, खुल के कैसे बात करें. आप ऑफ कैमरा जाओ भाई, मैं तो ऐसे करता हूँ, मैं तो वैसे करता हूँ, because we're still so afraid of accepting the fact that one, it is illegal, right? Second, the NDPS Act is so draconian that it doesn't apply. It should not apply to this.
Yes.
The war on drugs was started by America in the 60s, and every country followed suit. America has ended the war of drugs, war on drugs, and every country is still taking time to follow suit again. So, but yeah, I would say, man, thank you for your time. Thank you for especially coming all the way to make this happen. And where can people find your book, read your book?
So first of all, thank you so much for having me. I mean, this was my pleasure to speak to someone who would, you looked at it from the same curiosity that I hope people look at it, And again, I'm not trying to make this negative, positive. I'm just saying, ask questions. Be open to knowing more facts,
Yeah.
The book is called Ananda, An Exploration of Cannabis in India. It's gonna be in bookstores by the time I guess this is heard.
Sure.
It should be in bookstores all over the country, and of course it's on Amazon.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. You can also check it out from Aleph Book Co., which is the publisher of the book. You can follow. What's your Twitter account or somewhere else? Would you publish your work?
On Twitter, I am Karan Madhok 1. On Instagram, I am Karan Madhok.
Awesome, man. Well, if there's anything else you would like to perhaps send a message to our readers, to our watchers, the platform is yours.
No further message. I think I'm just happy that that I was allowed to do this. It feels like this. The journey to make this, to have this book come to life was so interesting for me. It was so much fun, and it was so interesting the places I saw in my country, which I would have never seen if I wasn't doing a book like this. So I'm just very grateful that I actually got to seek this out. And I had an editor, I want to shout her out, Ainla Ozukum, and she's somebody who really allowed me my creativity.
So, sorry, what's her name?
Her name is Ainla Ozukum.
Okay.
She's an editor for the Aleph Book Company, and this was actually her seed. This was her idea. She came up with this many years ago. She wanted someone to write it. And she allowed me she gave me a bare bone idea, and then I went crazy with it. She probably didn't expect what's going to happen with it, but she trusted the process and she trusted me that I will see this through. So I'm just grateful that this journey happened, and I hope that people, they have a good journey reading it. I hope it's a good experience for them to read.
I hope it's a good trip.
Exactly.
But no, I one last thing before we end. I've read tons of travel writing. I've read Pico Iyer. I've read Bruce Chatwin. I've also read Rolf Potts. I really enjoy travel writing, and I think travel writing with a journalistic purpose at the helm is far more exciting than मैं उदयपुर गया वहाँ पे ये 5 जगह जाने के लिए, because when you travel with a purpose, the world contorts to fit your purpose.
Yes.
So what you did is perhaps cannabis tourism, cannabis journalism, and that's documented very well in the book. And I really recommend everyone to check it out. The book is a fantastic read. I got through 70%, the rest I will get through. This was Dostcast with Karan Madhok. हम आपसे अगले एपिसोड में मिलेंगे. Don't forget to subscribe. Take care. Bye bye. Sayonara. Jai Hind. Done. Awesome.
Thank you,
Sweet.
man. That was great. I really enjoyed that.
Likewise.
Now I know why you're so good at it.